When World War I officially ended in 1919, it was thought that this conflict would be the wars to end all wars. This statement would be proven wrong 20 years later, when a resurgent Nazi Germany would invade Poland on the 1st of September 1939, sparking another war whose devastation would exceed that of World War I. Like the First World War, the Second World War would also break out due to a wide variety of factors, most if not all related to grievances carried over from the previous global conflict. The Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on the 28th of June 1919, brought an official end to World War I. But at the very outset, it became evident that a harsh peace would be imposed upon the defeated. France, in order to protect itself from a future German attack, put forth the demands of reparations, demilitarization of the Rhineland region, and the war guilt clause, which put the blame of starting the war squarely on Germany's shoulders. It was French revenge, nursed from the days of its defeat during the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, that led to the imposition of such harsh terms. The resulting war had also led to the unification of Germany, which was proclaimed in the very halls of the Versailles, which added insult to injury. The German people were outraged that they were to be held responsible for the conflict. Instead of working out an agreement that would bring peace, the victors were only content with humiliating them. The demilitarization of the military, the loss of territory, and the preposterous amount of reparation to be paid were akin to rubbing salt on an open wound. The Weimar government that came to power in Germany had no other choice but to accept the humiliating peace terms. This only labeled them as criminals and traitors in the eyes of the German people. In order to repay the massive reparations, the Weimar Republic began to print the German currency in huge numbers. This led to its devaluation and inflation on a massive scale and near collapse of the already fragile economy. Fed up with the mismanagement of its own government, the German people began to support anyone who would reverse the humiliation that was heaped upon them. It was at this time when Hitler and his Nazi party would emerge with such a promise. Rise of Nazism. The wave of resentment over the perceived injustices of the Treaty of Versailles was fully exploited by Hitler and his Nazi party. Capitalizing on the dent made towards German pride, Hitler promised to undo wrongs of the Versailles Treaty. Added to this was the us versus them rhetoric. In this case, the us were the Aryan race, while the them were the Slavic Eastern Europeans. The list of them also included Jews, communists, gypsies, and others who did not fit the Nazi definition of an Aryan. The Jews were blamed by the Nazis for the defeat in World War I, and all the economic hardship that followed was a conspiracy that had weakened Germany. This rhetoric would have serious consequences for the Jewish populations of Europe and Germany. Economic hardship. The harsh sanctions placed on Germany as per the Versailles Treaty only brought hardship for the German people. The Great Depression of the late 1920s further exacerbated the problem, with the price of essential items hitting through the roof. Hyperinflation caused the many essential items such as bread to become more expensive than they already had been, fueling much resentment against the fragile Weimar Republic. The Ruhr Valley was one of the most industrialized regions of Germany at the time. In order to claim war indemnities promised, France invaded the Ruhr Valley and occupied it. This hurt German pride to such an extent that they were willing to support any party or leader who would avenge the humiliation heaped upon them. It was fertile ground for Hitler and his Nazi party to rise in power. Failure of the League of Nations. The League of Nations, dissolved on April 20, 1946, was founded following the end of World War I in 1919. It was envisioned as an international body that would prevent conflicts between member nations from breaking out and disputes to be settled with diplomatic means. But to enforce and uphold its mandate, the League of Nations had no army of its own to do it. It had to rely on economic sanctions and armies of the member nations to uphold its directives. Although U.S. President Woodrow Wilson was an enthusiastic supporter of the League, he had to withdraw in the light of furious opposition from the more isolationist faction of the U.S. Congress, a faction that had no interest in being involved with the politics of distant Europe. The lack of participation from the United States lessened power and credibility of the United States. The addition of a burgeoning industrial and military world power such as the United States might have added more force behind the League's demands and requests. As such, the League of Nations was powerless to stop the Japanese invasion of China and the German invasion of Czechoslovakia. Due to the lack of response from the League, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and Fascist Italy would form an alliance of their own to begin to continue their own expansionist policy, setting the stage for a new world war. Japanese imperialism. Japan's 1941 aerial bombardment of the Pearl Harbor naval base in Hawaii brought the United States back into another global conflict. Though U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called the strike a surprise attack, it did not come out of nowhere. Rather, it grew from Japan's ambitions for imperial power. Frustrations had been building for decades in Japan over the country's role in the world. In 1919, representatives from the country pushed for a statement affirming racial equality to be included in the Treaty of Versailles but were rejected. Discriminatory laws in several Western countries targeted Japanese immigration. And to many in Japan, the international system that emerged after World War I seemed designed to privilege Westerners' access to wealth and resources. Japan had long sought to accumulate imperial power. Taiwan became Japan's first colony in 1895, and more territory followed. In 1931, Japan invaded China's Manchuria region, which provided a geographic buffer against Soviet communism as well as abundant natural resources that the island nation desperately lacked. After provoking a war in 1937, the Japanese invaded huge parts of China to the south of Manchuria. The invasion of Manchuria arguably marks the first salvo of the Second World War. Over the next decade, conflict escalated into outright war between Japan and China. During the war, Japanese forces massacred military prisoners and civilians and committed widespread sexual violence. Up to 20 million Chinese people are estimated to have died between 1937 and 1945. Despite these tactics and global outrage over atrocities like the rape of Nanjing, years passed before Japan's aggression provoked international retaliation. But Japan's ascendancy and the conflict in Europe concerned Roosevelt. He instituted an embargo cutting Japan off from U.S. oil in response to the country's expansionism. Japan's navy had only about 6 months of oil in reserve. The country decided it was time for an offensive strategy toward Western targets, including at Pearl Harbor. The United States declared war on Japan on December 8, 1941, one day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 11, Germany and Italy, allies with Japan under the 1940 Tripartite Pact, retaliated by declaring war on the United States. U.S. isolationism. The United States of the 1920s and 1930s had, in many ways, turned inward. The mood back home was dour in the aftermath of the First World War, which had taken so many lives, and the Great Depression, which had ruined many of those who survived. Though the country continued to play an active international role, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, it stayed mostly aloof from the armed conflicts unfolding across Europe and Asia. Against this backdrop, Congress enacted high, protectionist tariffs intended to shield American businesses from competition, which damaged relations between the United States and its trading partners. It also passed several neutrality acts aimed at ensuring the United States avoided foreign conflicts. The Senate had rejected U.S. membership in the League of Nations in 1919 for similar reasons. Meanwhile, Domestic resistance to President Roosevelt's moves to support the Allies in the 1930s revealed to Germany and Japan that aggression had few downsides. At the start of the 1940s, isolationism had strong support from a political organization called the America First Committee. The group had about 800,000 members and a famous proponent, Charles Lindbergh, the first pilot to cross the Atlantic Ocean solo. The organization's stated aim was to keep the United States out of the war, which began in Europe in 1939, but the group also served as a platform for racism and anti-Semitism. A public opinion poll from May 1940 showed 93% of Americans surveyed were against the United States declaring war on Germany. But on December 7, 1941, the argument over whether to join the fighting became moot. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the German declaration of war, the United States was ready for war both in Europe and the Pacific. Failure of appeasement. The Nazis embarked on a massive rearmament program despite the Versailles Treaty forbidding such a venture. Lack of protest or sanctions only sped up the process. A new air force, the Luftwaffe, was formed. The German Navy was expanded and conscription was introduced. Another violation of the treaty occurred when German troops took the Rhineland in March 1936. These events only boosted Hitler's image domestically and provided much-needed employment. Buoyed by his success, Hitler decided to push his luck regarding foreign appeasement. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, believed that appeasement was the only way to avoid a conflict. When claims on Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia were made, he readily agreed, signed the Munich Agreement. But the complete subjugation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939 turned public opinion in the rest of Europe against Hitler. Neville Chamberlain finally realized that Hitler would not stop with a concession here or there. It was well known that Hitler would also claim Prussia and the Courland Peninsula on the same grounds he had claimed Sudetenland. It was populated by a majority of ethnic Germans. The problem was, Prussia was in the middle of Polish territory. Both France and Britain guaranteed their sovereignty, which is why when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, France and Britain declared war, sparking World War II in earnest. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share.